Today on CityCast Nashville, I'm producer Daniel Sumstein, and I'm joined by Julie Height, senior music writer for Nashville Public Radio, to talk about the growing opportunities for hip-hop artists in Music City. We dive into the city's evolving relationship with hip-hop, the influence of genre crossovers, and what still needs to change for Nashville's hip-hop scene to thrive. It's Thursday, February 20th, and this is what Nashville's talking about. Julie, thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us today. We're going to get into the local hip hop scene that you've been covering. But first off, I got to know, what did you think of Kendrick Lamar's halftime show?
Oh, man, that was the reason that I watched the Super Bowl. I was not disappointed. I mean, I loved it. I loved that he brought such seriousness in his overall vision, how he conceptualized it, how he was tying in, multi-layered imagery and framing it in this very self-aware way, in incorporating a dialogue by casting Samuel L. Jackson as part of it, right. Incorporating this external dialogue and his awareness of perceptions being projected onto him. I mean, so many different layers to it of just rich symbolism. And I think he proved what is possible, what you can do with a Super Bowl halftime show when you have serious artistic intentions and want to actually say something. You can do a lot more than just perform a medley of your hits.
I'm a Chiefs fan, so that was like the only good part of the Super Bowl for me. The rest was...
I'm sorry. Yeah. Sorry for that. But I mean, I think it still made it worth it, the way that he just elevated the space with that show.
Absolutely. So yeah, we know you're working on a series for WPLN highlighting Nashville's hip hop artists and a rise in industry resources such as songwriting camps.
I should probably let people know, if they don't know what we're talking about when we say songwriting camps, those are a thing in the industry. They happen in Nashville. They happen in all the major cities that are industry hubs. And they also happen in remote scenic locations that people want to kind of go on vacation to or have a bit of a retreat while also making music together for a specific project. Could be for a TV show or a film or an artist album or something like that. I have been hearing of it happening in country contexts here for a while, but I got to last fall be a fly on the wall at two different camps that happened during the same week, which was pretty dope. And one of them was the first camp that Prescription Songs and Dramatized, which is, the company that Tay Keith started, and they have an office and studio here. The first time those two companies teamed up together to do a camp in Nashville, and they pulled in different writers and producers, top liners, by which I mean the people who are vocalists and lyricists, and that's their focus. I was in a room where they were writing for the rapper Don Toliver. So I cannot wait to see, what happens with some of the music that was made during that camp. There are real commercial stakes to that stuff. And then that same week, I got to go see the grassroots version. It's called Camp 3 that Jack Vinoy puts on. He's an independent musician, producer, artist who's part of the scene and wanted to create a space with no barrier to entry. So anybody can come and be a part of it, even if you have no experience collaborating in the studio at all. It was just creative chaos. People in a studio, in every possible space, in the hallway, in the utility closet, there were sessions going on. And there were people just exploring in a safe space and trying stuff out for the first time. And that was such a valuable experience for them to get to learn and gain experience and see how things work and just get connected with each other.
As we all know, Nashville has a long history of country music, but hip hop has often been overlooked in the city's music industry.
Right.
How do you see that narrative changing?
Well, I mean, the narrative, I think, has been changing for several years, and that has been driven by just the serious artistic intentions of artists and collectives and crews of artists that are based here. I felt like they were demanding our attention. For anybody who was paying attention to music that matters, independent music that matters, that's being made here and telling us things that we need to know about the city that we live in. That was really happening with projects, mixtapes and albums and EPs and Lucy's that I saw folks releasing like late in the 2010s. You had to pay attention to it. You had to say, they're making really phenomenal music. They're defining or redefining, giving us new definitions for what Nashville hip hop looks like, sounds like, feels like, and telling us a lot of truth about gentrification in the city. I felt like songs that I heard from Nashville hip hop artists told the truth about, what it means to live in Nashville in the shadow of the reputation of the country music industry. They told it more truthfully than anyone else that I'd heard, but actually building different kinds of business infrastructure and putting resources around other sides of music making, that's a newer thing that I've been kind of waiting and watching for, like in terms of the publishing side and what kinds of distribution artists can get access to. And then beyond that, we'll be watching for landing tour slots and things like that are also important components of building a sustainable career.
I mean, I think you're spot on. Hip hop in general, like lyrically, is in my opinion, the most truthful music out there nowadays. And when I first moved to Nashville back in 2014, my roommate Kayvon actually got me. At the time, he was putting on a concert series called Elevate Nashville.
Oh, yeah.
And he really was kind of my introduction to the hip hop scene here in Nashville, and just such an organic, positive community.
Yeah. I mean, when you're sort of doing it for yourself and doing it for, I mean, there's also very much been a sense among music makers that I talk with that they're prioritizing their entire scene or circle or community too. They're trying to, put everyone on, and that exists alongside their own ambitions as individual artists.
Absolutely. Yeah. What would you say are some of the specific industry barriers that these local creatives face? And how does all of this collaboration help break these down?
I saw it's been many, many years, maybe even a couple of decades, that the country music industry has been working with and relying on elements of hip hop and R&B in, the pop side of mainstream country. And there have been people working as what are called track people. They're beat makers and songwriters that are making hip hop influenced country material or R&B leaning country material. And I noticed that it was rarely people who specialize in that work from Nashville's own primarily Black hip hop and R&B scenes that were getting those gigs. That was certainly one thing I noticed that was glaring to me. And then I think just watching how self-sufficient music makers doing hip hop and R&B have had to be, because they can't rely on having these pipelines where they will easily be able to move through the stages of development and get a manager and get a publishing deal and get a booking agent. Those paths just haven't been laid out. So when you look at what an artist like Daisha McBride has been doing with her longtime manager, Delisha Davis, they've been creating their own path. No one handed them the template and said, this is what you're supposed to do. And they've, worked on their own for like viral moments and all kinds of big gigs. But I really took note of the difference that it made when independent music makers that I'd been following got, their first taste of access to some of these opportunities, the difference it could make for them. Like for instance, when Bryant Taylor and Tim Gent and A.B. Eastwood each signed their publishing deals with Prescription Songs, that opened up a whole new world for each of them in terms of collaboration that they've been doing on sessions all over the place with all kinds of people. It was more about sending them outside of Nashville to go to Atlanta or LA or Miami, where there were already these like robust worlds that they could go and get plugged into.
Right. Yeah. It almost feels like the pipeline for publishing is really the only pipeline that currently exists in Nashville. Like, I'm so glad you brought up Deja McBride, because that's someone who is leveraging TikTok, really leaning into this new wave of how people are getting their music out there, regardless of location. It's so common that artists who start here end up moving to Atlanta, just because there's a ceiling here, unfortunately.
But, it is exciting to see the difference it makes when people are investing here as opposed to moving elsewhere. I mean, the fact that Tay Keith built a studio here, I think people don't really have any idea that he and producers that are signed to his company, they're here doing, pretty major stuff sometimes, writing and recording. And the Sexy Red project that blew up last year was recorded here in his studio. That's a big deal. And what Prescription is doing and will continue to do, it's more than just that one camp in terms of tapping into the talent here. And I'm interested to see, since Empire Records, which Shabuzi is signed to, they have a Nashville office.
Yeah. Rock Nation is here.
Yeah. I mean, they've had various, Rock Nation has had various things here over time. Yeah. And Gamma, I'm not exactly sure what their presence looks like in Nashville at the moment, but that's the company that Tim Gent is releasing his single MLB through. If there's that kind of investment happening and publishing companies or production companies or labels or distributors setting up here or investing here, that will register, and that has the potential to increase the opportunity and the activity here. Because certainly the folks I talked with at Prescription and Dramatized, putting on the camps, they want to make Nashville more of a destination for people who are based elsewhere to come here to work on hip hop, to write or to record. So it's not just that they want to clue people in, like, oh yeah, there's something going on in Nashville with hip hop. They want to make it, they want to be exporting it and making it a destination for people.
What sort of promises have you made to yourself this year? Maybe get in better shape or eat healthier, save more money, travel somewhere new. What about discovering a new culture by learning a new language? With Babbel, you can do that in just a few weeks. I'm CityCast CEO David Plotz, and I'm having such a good time learning Spanish on Babbel this year. I'm taking a trip to Mexico City in the spring, and Babbel is giving me the Spanish foundation that's going to make my trip so much better. Babbel's quick 10-minute lessons, handcrafted by more than 200 language experts, get you to begin speaking your new language in 3 weeks, or at whatever pace you choose. And because conversing is the key to really understanding each other in a new language, Babbel is designed using practical, real-world conversations. And one way they do that is with their own podcasts. I'm a podcast listener. I'm guessing since you're listening to this podcast, you are too. And I have been getting ready for my Mexico City trip by listening to Babbel's conversational podcasts. There's a short conversation you listen to, then an instructor talks you through what happened, and then you listen again, and then you catch everything when you listen that second time. There's also a great read-along transcript, too, which I love. The one I did today was with Maria and Carmela trying to make dinner plans, but Carmela is so busy. She's way too busy with work and yoga, but finally they agreed on brunch on Saturday. Studies from Yale, Michigan State, and other universities continue to prove that Babbel works. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. So let's get more of you talking in a new language. Babbel is gifting CityCast listeners 60% off subscriptions at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Babbel.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
We are seeing this new wave and crossover of country and hip hop. Let's just acknowledge what it is. You know, we've got, the Post Malones of the world and Shaboozies, but there's also like a sentiment that I've heard in the hip hop community that country music has adopted the genre, but gentrified its influence for mainstream consumption. How do you think, how do you think the crossover of country and hip hop has impacted hip hop creatives?
This is a process that has been going on for quite some time. This is just the latest wave of it. But, I think it's really important to note that it's, been primarily done by white artists and white music makers. And, like I pointed out, they have not been tapping into the people who are specialists, in that kind of songwriting and production here in their city, by and large. That is a divide that has not been bridged. And that makes a difference because it means that the credit and the visibility and the wealth that's generated from that music is not being shared with people who actually, really focus on and specialize in hip hop and R&B here. So that is one big thing. And then it is a really complicated thing to look at the rise of an artist like Jelly Roll, who, many people that I know and talk with who've been in hip hop scenes in Nashville for quite some time, knew him from those days when he was dropping all kinds of mixtapes in the era that people were downloading free mixtapes from sites like DatPiff. That's when I first was aware of him. So he was moving in completely different scenes and circles back in those days. And it's a complicated thing to watch him move from that because, those were, at least to an extent, racially blended contexts. But, he would have had far more collaborators and peers who were Black in those settings than now moving into the country space that he is in. But he's kind of looked at as someone who came from that. And even visually, people perceive that from his look, his face tattoos and that kind of thing. And he's not, by and large, having hits from rapping at this point, but it's kind of like he represents this, this narrative of this redemption arc and this artist who made good. But that's a complicated thing. That's not the same thing as bringing up a Black Nashville native who was a rapper and who has country leanings and helping an artist with that kind of background develop a country career. It's a different thing, it's a complex thing that I'm still chewing on myself as I watch it play out. Was he one of the artists that you were thinking of, Jelly Roll?
Yeah, absolutely. Not a lot of people realize he was making trap music 10 years ago in Antioch.
Yeah, and even longer than that, for sure.
I'm happy for him. He seems like a good dude and he's done a lot. So I can understand like both angles of the conversation.
There's probably more than two angles there.
Yeah,
I would say. And I've seen firsthand that a lot of people who, were part of his circle way back ride for him and root for him. And there's a class layer to it too that is also complicated because people still perceive country music as music of the working class, or demographically it has been marketed as music of the white working class, but it hasn't only or primarily been that in generations. It's been upwardly mobile music, and so to have someone who actually kind of comes from the streets and comes from an economically precarious background and a lot of struggle and a lot of things that he lived that is kind of returning a very real and tangible story of working class roots to the forefront of country music.
What other events, organizations, or communities are helping support and elevate hip hop creatives in Nashville? Just for our listeners out there who may want to get involved.
It takes a lot of energy and resources to sustain things. So I've seen things kind of ebb and flow, but the camp that Jack Vanoy puts on, Camp 3, is an ongoing thing. So there will be another one of those in the coming months for people who want to be participating and getting to know people. That's a great space for that. Sunday Night Soul at the 5 spot has been a space for a lot of folks. Analog has been doing a soul space. I've seen a lot of independent artists doing stuff performance-wise, show-wise, more in some of the DIY spaces in town because that's what they can book a show at, places like the East Room and the Cobra. But yeah, there needs to be a lot more of a lot of different kinds of settings where people can talk and learn about how different facets of the industry works, or learn where the needs are, or compare notes, or find resources, because there are so many different kinds of mixers and mentoring and internship opportunities if you're pursuing other avenues in Nashville. But yeah, I want to know who else is doing stuff in terms of showcases and town hall conversations and mentoring programs. It's tough right now, I feel like, because funding was kind of funneled toward things like that a few years ago, or just a couple of years ago, and then some of it's kind of drying up.
What story is next in your WPLN series?
The third story in the series is actually about Tim Gent and the producer A.B. Eastwood, who's worked with a million people here and currently lives in LA, but he's still very connected to Nashville and he grew up here. And I got to talk with them about this really long, meandering journey that a song they started making in 2022 has taken. It's called MLB, and they refined it and tweaked it and rescued it because crashed hard drive, they lost the file. And, we're working on it all this time and then posting demos and clips and things about it, sort of teasing people, who follow Tim with bits of the song or earlier versions of it. And they got to see the demand grow for the song, unlike anything else Tim had ever released. And ultimately, his managers started getting interest from record labels like they never had before. And now that song is being released through a large new distribution and marketing company called Gamma. So we're going to get to see what happens with this song that people have been living with, partying to in Nashville for a few years, hopefully make its way onto big playlists, and get radio airplay and all kinds of cutting edge marketing and build his profile. And yeah, that's going to be really, I think, something to watch.
Yeah, hopefully that just opens the floodgates for everyone. I think that's ultimately what we've been waiting for here in the hip hop community of Nashville, is someone to just open the floodgates for everyone else, Well, this has been just such an awesome conversation. We did want to just, before we go, thank you for hooking us up with our theme music.
I forgot about that. Prof Jenkins. Yeah.
How did you meet him and what made you think of him for us?
You can't be immersed in music in Nashville and not run into Prof Jenkins, or you're doing it wrong, I would say. Yeah, I think I crossed paths with him because he has for some time now been one of the directors of TSU's phenomenal marching band, the AOB, the Aristocrat of Bands. And, you know, in addition to being a professor and a mentor of so many other young musicians coming up there, I mean, he is himself an artist and has had a brass band called Brassville that was playing around town a lot and recording. And he's been doing, you know, ambient music and jazz, all kinds of stuff. And I really got to dig in with him when he and the AOB made a Grammy-winning gospel album. You know, I mean, that was something that I had to get to the bottom of. How in the world do you record an entire marching band that's not exactly a studio unit? Like, how can you possibly capture and balance that? And yeah, I mean, he just does so many really, really interesting, compelling things and is just always mentoring, you know, young musicians coming up. So yeah, like his mind, his imagination as a creator, as a music maker, and just as an important educational figure in the city.
And I mean, our theme music is iconic. So thank you, Prof. Jenkins.
Yeah, because he's an icon.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Cool. Well, this has been so wonderful. Thank you again for your time. And to everyone listening, make sure to check out the ongoing series on the hip hop community here in Nashville. And yeah, thank you again, Julie, so much.
You are so welcome. I'll see you at a show.
That's all for today here on CityCast Nashville. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell your friends, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our Hey Nashville newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Later.